Good afternoon, and welcome to this lunchtime session from the Sustainable Business Network on 6 things every business needs to do on plastic packaging. It's great to have you with us. We'll be with you for just about an hour. We'll see how we run. And essentially, we'll be running through some of the findings from the Plastics Masterclass workshop series that we've been running for just over a year now. My name is Andy Kenworthy. I am the Communications and Campaigns Advisor for the Sustainable Business Network. So this morning, it will be myself and Kate Haselhoff, Project and Partnership Manager for the Sustainable Business Network. We're just going to sort of talk through some of the key points and take questions from you folks out there as to how we can kind of start to grapple with plastic packaging in our businesses and take those steps we need to take to make things more sustainable. Obviously, we're going out live, so if you've got questions, please chuck them in the Q&A box as usual. We will get to those towards the end of our session. If you can keep them concise, it's easier for me because I'll be reading them off a screen, and then we can run that as normal. Thanks so much to our partners who've supported us throughout this process: Foodstuffs, New Zealand King Salmon, and ThinkStep, all of whom have been stout supporters and also participants in this process. And it's great to have those big businesses taking the steps, as well as ThinkStep's interesting thinking throughout what we've been doing. So yeah, we're really looking at those key findings. We did a report, which we'll link at the end if you haven't already seen it, which kind of sums up the 2020 Plastic Packaging Masterclass series. And that series brought together over 100 representatives from various businesses and experts, ranging from local authorities, regulators, to product designers and major businesses and procurers, all of whom put their heads in the room on several occasions to sort of have a look through the processes and systems around plastic packaging and what we might do to change them for the better. And what we did then was pretty much gathered everything together and summarized it as best we could. And a lot of this isn't signed and sealed and delivered. It's this is an ongoing process which we want you to be a part of. There's no easy solutions for some of this stuff, but what we are doing is gathering our ideas together as fast as we can to give you that clear guidance. So please feel free to chuck those ideas in and also chuck your questions in as we go. It's all good stuff. And of course, usable guidance on how plastic packaging is changing all the time as well. Something we'll touch on as we speak today about the way that certain products can get more recyclable and less recyclable, sometimes quite rapidly. So it's a changing game we need to keep our eyes on. And of course, it affects so much in all of our businesses, from where we get our coffee cups to where our local recycling centres are, how we manage our waste, and also that interface with customers and increasingly concerned customers who are going to ask us the tricky questions about what we're doing and where all our stuff is coming from. But what we really wanted to do today was get some immediately actionable advice, stuff you could take away from this session and get on and use in your everyday businesses. So first up, I'll bring up Kate to have a chat, and we'll talk through how this all started and where we go to next. Kate, if you're there, I know you are because I saw you earlier. There you are, look, fantastic.
How are we going?
We're good. We're good. I'm being hosted lovingly by the people at Unitech this afternoon, because we have another event later on this afternoon on construction and demolition. Welcome to those that have come along to that. If not, I think it's being filmed, so we'll see that later. So thanks to Unitech for hosting me here. Kate, you're at home somewhere sunny?
Absolutely, sunny Auckland today, which is beautiful.
Lovely. So first off, if you could just let us know, how did all this process sort of start, and why is it so important?
Yeah, sure. So for us at SBN in 2018, as many people will know, China decided that they were going to stop taking low quality recyclate from essentially the world, and that spanned things into a bit of a hurricane where we didn't really know what was going to happen, and everything was in a bit of free fall. And we had a lot of our investors in SBN's network come to us and say, what are we going to do about plastics? And I mean, at the same time, there's obviously growing concern from the public with the images like straws up turtle noses and bottles and albatrosses. And so it was kind of a perfect storm for action. And we set out to kind of understand what was going on and produced a 2018 diagnostics report. And in that report, we kind of talked to a bunch of key stakeholders throughout the packaging system in New Zealand. So we talked to the recyclers, the packaging industry, the plastic suppliers and manufacturers, brands, everybody. And what we kind of figured out was that there was a lot of great work going on, but there wasn't necessarily a very coordinated approach, and there was a lot of kind of silos where people weren't talking to each other. At the same time, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is an awesome global entity, released their global commitment, which they made a goal to make all plastic packaging 100% reusable, recyclable or compostable by 2025. And that goal has really taken off within global community around packaging, and is something that the New Zealand government adopted as well. So we at SBN signed up to be signatories to that and supporters of that, and have since kind of been implementing our masterclass series. So from the 2018 diagnosis, we realized that there was these silos, and we just needed to get everyone in the same room and talking, because everyone was working towards the same goal. And so that's exactly what we did. We ran some, in 2019, 3 really interactive sessions, and then produced a report from that, which was kind of the first time that I found it really interesting, because in that first session there was finger pointing. There was, brands being like, government, you tell us what you want, and the government saying, hey, we have to do what you guys want. That's what a government is. And the packaging industry saying, but we're getting told it's recyclable because of the number, and then the recyclers saying, but it's not recyclable, and a lot of confusion. And those masterclasses really helped kind of iron out some of that confusion and get some really clear pieces of information, like what is actually recyclable in New Zealand, what is our infrastructure like. And then 2020 happened, and we had a global pandemic, which was very interesting, and really shone a light on the good qualities of plastic as well, in terms of things like safety and food protection, and how much we rely on it in our supply chains and that kind of thing. And so brought with it another lens, but at the same time still kind of realizing that the goals around 100% reusable, recyclable and compostable. So we came back together and we focused on some specific challenges, and that's kind of the resource that we're talking about today, is the outputs from that 2020 discussion and where we got to.
Fantastic. It was kind of a classic SBN approach. There was a diagnostic report looking at the whole system, seeing how the bits fitted together. And I think one of the startling things about that was how little was known really at that stage in terms of where this plastic was all coming from, how it was flying around our systems and where it would end up, which was quite scary. And then we went from there, okay, how can we do something about this? And I think for me there's that key element of real recycling, like making recycling actually happen, rather than what we're seeing is one loop and then you're dead into the landfill, if at all. And battering down some of those confusions around what can happen. And it was fascinating for me in 2 or 3 of the sessions to see, the experts. We always started our masterclasses with a session on what can you recycle, what can you not recycle, with real rubbish in the room. And it was fascinating to see the experts and the businesses really not know, to be honest. And even the experts running the sessions get caught out going, well, actually, no, because of the dye in that one, or it's got a sticker on it, and all that stuff. Amazing. But it was so good to see people come really put the work into workshop, turn up with their sleeves rolled up, ready to actually get stuff done, not just kind of listen in and have tea and biscuits. And that's where we've got to today. I think it's generated a lot of really useful stuff, which is what we want to share, because the reports, it's a big beast and there's a lot to learn. But today we wanted to sort of just give you some nuggets, with the caveat that, a lot of this stuff requires you to learn a certain amount of the lingo, some of the ways that the things fit together, in order to kind of make your own assessments, because it isn't a sort of tick box exercise just yet. It isn't. That's what we're aiming for. It's something so simple you don't have to have webinars. But at the moment, it's still a case where you've got to grapple with it yourself to quite a large extent.
Absolutely.
So what we're going to do.
That's talked about a lot, as well as what's the silver bullet, what packaging should I use? And there really is no silver bullet. I wish I could tell you. It's such a situation by situation need at the moment, and hopefully we'll get there one day where we'll have a really clear answer to what's right and what's wrong.
If that was the case, we'd probably not be doing this job. We'd be selling that material. And retiring. So in the meantime, but we will give you kind of clear pointers, and that's something we've done all the way through. Is particularly with some of the more complex issues, which we'll touch on as we go through, like the compostables and things, where it's very complicated and nuanced. We've tried to give a clear pathway so you can make your own decisions. So what we'll do is we're going to go through these 6 points. We'll just introduce them and say what they're all about, and then I'll ask Kate a few questions about them to kind of clarify, partly in my own mind and partly for you at home. And as we go through, stack up those questions for us, and we'll bring them to Kate towards the end. We're not asking Kate to answer all of them. You know, we've been through this process. We've learned a hell of a lot, but there is no one kind of super expert across all of this, you know, and there is always stuff that people disagree with, and that's fine too, as this process develops.
Yeah, go easy.
Yeah. I'm sure there's people, I mean, we've got quite a few people listening in, and I'm sure there's people lurking that know more about this than certainly I do, and that's great. So contributions all welcome.
Awesome.
So I'll go these points. But I was just going to share my screen to bring up the little slide. So what we do is we broke it down into different points. And the first one was audit your plastic packaging. And that's basically take a look at what's going on, like we did for the whole of the system. Kate, can you sort of talk us through what we mean when we say audit your plastic packaging?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the first step to... Oh, are you there?
That's all right. Yep, still there. I just took down the slide. That's all right.
Oh, cool, awesome. Yeah, the first step to you know, being able to make decisions on your packaging is actually knowing what packaging you have. And we've found, you know, by talking to a lot of brands, that brands don't actually know what materials their packaging is made from. They don't know what different materials, maybe the componentry is made on, maybe the lid's different to the body, or the label's different to the lid, whatever it is. But there's a really lack of understanding around what is actually the packaging that we have. And so that's the first step, is to kind of go through your supply chain, look at maybe start with your primary packaging, which is your consumer facing packaging, and see what you've actually got. To do that, make a spreadsheet, and then you can document your packaging by range. So you can either break it down into any, I guess, logical grouping that would work for your organization. It could be that you kind of group together all similar materials. So it could be all flexible packaging or dry goods packaging or something like that. So get them all in there in a logical way for your organization, and then start to input some data around it. So how much you're using, quantities and weights and that kind of thing. There's some good spreadsheets and things online that you can go into and have a look for that. Once you've got all your packaging kind of in your spreadsheet and you can have it there to see, you can now evaluate it against what packaging is actually problematic. We've got some information in our resource about what problematic packaging is, but there's also really good other resources like the APCO, or Australian Packaging Covenants one. They've got a sustainable packaging checklist. And so you can take your groups of packaging and check them off against this list of whether it's sustainable or not, and that will help to give you some indication on where your action areas are.
Sure. Yeah. We've seen this done. I mean, it ranges everything from, you know, you could do a real detailed analysis and get experts and everything, but you can start as simply as, you know, just laying the stuff out really and tallying up what you've got, especially for the smaller businesses.
Absolutely. Just understand what you've got and then check out what the bad stuff is, and that's your priority area.
And we'll be talking about some of those kind of bad guys as we go through, and what you might want to look for in certain sectors. And you can literally just pick. You can start by just picking one and going, look, I want to see how much of this particular issue I've got. Might be around just one element of your business to start the ball rolling and get you learning. Absolutely.
I think on that as well, there's a lot of movement in the data space around packaging at the moment. We've seen at a national level. In 2019, the Office for the Prime Minister Chief Science Advisor released a report called Rethinking Plastics, which is huge. It's about 270 pages, so might be a bit too much for nighttime reading, but really, really good nuggets of information. And one of the things that they highlighted in that was that there's a severe lack of data around plastic packaging and plastics in general in New Zealand. We don't know how much is coming in. We don't know how much is being used, where it's ending up. And so, you know, the more information that we can collect as individuals, as individual businesses, and as groups around what we've got and where it is, the better the system will be.
Good stuff. And you can also involve your suppliers, of course, as we did throughout the workshops. You can, and we've got sustainable procurement materials about purchasing on our website about the sort of questions you can ask. So you can easily go back to the, because a lot of businesses, they're not creating their plastic packaging, they're just on receiving it. But you can get active about that and say, where's this stuff coming from, exactly what it is, and ask all the right questions.
Absolutely.
Good stuff. Okie dokie. So we'll go on to we'll go slide 2 now. Here we go. Press button. Do that. So the next up on our list was sorry.
Take time to design, I think.
Sorry, time to design. It was. You know what? It's because there you go. Look at that. That's better. Take time to design. There you go. So what's this one about, Kate?
I would say it's about really thinking about what the service that you're offering is and how can you make that service as low waste as possible. There's a really cool story that I actually just read recently in a book called A Waste-Free World, and in that book they talk about the how the paper cup or the disposable cup was created, and there was a big like water cylinder essentially where people would drink from. And there was attached to the water cylinder by a chain was a metal cup, and people would put would get their drink and have a drink out of this metal cup, but people were getting sick. And so this guy was like, hey, I'm going to design these paper cups for a penny that will sit alongside the water canister. And it's so funny to think, if he had come up with washing the cup over over creating a disposable cup, where would we be as a world? Would we be, still in these kind of reusable systems, or would we have massive waste like we do today?
Yeah. Early on in the process, one of the experiences I had was sitting in meetings and thinking, we should have had these discussions about 75 years ago, before we created these mountains of waste all over the place. Absolutely. And I suppose that story as well illustrates the thing about, he was solving a real problem there when he designed it, and nearly all of the packaging and all the other kind of iterations of plastic we've got around, they're solving real problems. They're actually, they're useful, but it's kind of diving back into the problem with a design lens and saying, okay, how can we do a better job of this at this stage, and not being lazy about sort of going, well, I'll just do it the old way and offload the problem onto somebody else.
Absolutely. I think now's a good nice time to bring in another framework that we use quite regularly at SBN, which was again designed by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and that's the concept of eliminate, innovate, and circulate. So eliminate kind of is where you start, and it speaks to, eliminate unnecessary packaging. So eliminate anything that you don't actually need. We often buy things, especially now in our e-commerce world, where there's layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of plastic wrap, and then polystyrene and all of these things. Like, how can we minimize that to serve the the minimum functional purpose that actually is required for that product? So yeah, eliminate what we don't need, get rid of unnecessary packaging. And then number 2 is innovate. So the packaging that we do need, go through that design process like we were talking about, see if there's a way that we can move higher up the waste hierarchy, see if we can get into reusable systems, and if you can't do that, then maybe recyclable, but let's try and avoid landfill at all costs. And then finally circulate. So whatever materials you do decide to use, make sure that they fit into a circular economy system where they are continuously kept in high value circulation in our economy and out of landfill.
Sure thing. Yeah, and that process can kind of feed itself as well. Once you've decided to eliminate, or at least just raise the possibility, then you can ask your suppliers and yourselves to innovate. You can go, okay, I want to get rid of this. How do I do it? And it's amazing how many solutions emerge when they're asked for. Because I've also sort of noticed that some of the sort of middle-sized and major players in plastics design and packaging, they're actually really innovative. There's guys hidden away all over New Zealand that are doing amazing things. It just requires someone to ask them, can we do this? Is it possible?
Yeah, we just need some good thinkers out there, and that's what Kiwis are made for. So,
and we're already seeing some of those emerge again, and things like the new cups coming forward. We capture case studies all the time of simple things that can be changed.
Yeah, and maybe now's also one other resource that's really worth checking out if you are going through a design process for your packaging. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation have released a resource called the Upstream Innovation Guide, and it takes you through that process of eliminate, innovate, and circulate, and gives hundreds and hundreds of case studies that might be applicable for your product in your business.
That's right. There's real business advantage available there, eh? There's fresh ground and fresh profit to be made, as well as, because it's seen as, and we will talk about regulation on one of our points, and it can be seen as everything being restrictive and I can't do more. But actually, a lot of the time it unleashes, new business models, new ways of doing things that can be fearsomely effective, especially in a world that's looking for answers. We want that innovation spreading from our shores.
Absolutely.
Great stuff. Okie dokie. On to the next one. So our next one is
switch to reuse.
Switch to reuse. Switch to reusables even. There you go.
Yeah.
What do we do here?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in a reusable revolution for New Zealand. I think that a really cool metaphor that somebody shared with me was that when you're having a glass of wine, you pour the wine out of the bottle and then drink the wine, and then you put the wine glass into the dishwasher, but you put the wine bottle into recycling. And it just seems a bit strange. Why do we value the wine glass so much more when it's made out of the same material as the wine bottle? And in that example, I mean, we're talking about plastics today, but in that example, if you were to wash that wine bottle, there's 95% carbon reduction. And so that's huge energy savings, and that's next to recycling. That's not even going to landfill. That's a 95% carbon reduction in next to recycling, which is just huge.
That's right, and assuaging your alcoholic guilt at the same time, and it's a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, let's get into new systems. Let's innovate here. Reuse is happening all the time. You've got people, like you mentioned before, again, offering their reusable cup service. You've got, the likes of Whoop, who are taking back a lot of their boxes and all of their packaging and reusing some of it and recycling the rest of it. There's a lot of space for innovation in the reusable space, and if you want to check it out, then there's a really good guide, reuse guide, that we link to in our resource, as well as some good examples in there as well.
And all these things scale up, don't they? There's kind of these hidden tiny margins where we've just go, actually, it'd be a little bit better if we did that. And it's easy to think that, but if you're running, if you're producing thousands and thousands of wine bottles every day, it soon stacks up to some pretty major gains. What are the sort of things that tend to be single? I mean, I think there's the kind of usual suspects that tend to be single use that people can nut out, but maybe they're not so aware of them. Where would they find in an average business? Where would you sort of find this single use stuff knocking around?
I mean, hospitality is a huge one for single use, and in terms of plastic packaging, it's looking to be phased out in a lot of the kind of international areas like UK and Europe, and are looking to ban single-use plastic cutlery items, for example. So that's a key spot for packaging. Yeah, I guess garment bags as well is a really big one. So we move so many garment bags through these systems every single day, and there's no true recycling for those like soft plastic. So yeah, I would definitely say that is one that is ripe for innovation.
Yeah, we talked a lot about some of the backroom stuff as well, like the sort of plastic wrap you get around pallets and things like that. A lot of the kind of logistical packaging that the customer might never see, but there's a lot of that around, eh?
Yeah, and there's some really cool innovations around pallet wraps now as well. So replacing that plastic pallet wrap for reusable options. We highlight a couple in the resource, but yeah, I know that there's like pallet type and green spider. I think it's called green spider. But there's some new innovations in that pallet wrap space as well.
Yeah. So, like all these things, it's just a bit of fresh attention. It's just taking the time to go and look through the systems one more time and see if there's something new on the market, because it's coming out, and a lot of it's being very well received. We've had amazing things turn up with mushroom materials and all sorts of wild and wonderful things that look like the future. Absolutely. Excellent. And the next one's avoid plastics 3 and 6. I should get this right, because if we don't, we'll confuse ourselves.
Yeah, and so I put in here rigid plastics 1, 2, and 5 are recyclable. so there's a bit of confusion there around plastic. You've got your flexible plastics, which are things like your plastic bag, you can scrunch them up in your hand, and then you've got your rigid plastics like your Coke bottles and hard containers. And when we talk about recycling, flexible plastics are not currently recyclable via curbside collections. So any number in flexible plastics can't go in your recycling bin. However, the soft plastics recycling scheme is a great place to put them, and they've got them in a lot of the, there's a lot of collection points throughout the country now for your soft plastics. So do gather them up, and you can make use of that scheme by dropping it off to certain locations. But yeah, what we were talking about is rigid plastics. So we've had some really nice clarity from the government indicating that 1, 2s and 5s are kind of the go-to for rigid plastic. So if you are choosing a plastic material for your packaging and it is rigid plastic, go for one of those 3. I had a question last night where somebody asked me, hey, why don't we just have 1? And to explain that a little bit, it's because the different numbers provide different functional purposes. So there might be like thermal properties, like you can hot fill a number 2, but you can't hot fill a number 1 or something like that. So there's different functional purposes for the products that you use. But generally speaking, clear PET, natural HDPE are our best. And then next down would be coloured HDPE and PP number 5. And then the bottom one would be your coloured PET. But if you need any further clarification on that, or I know it's kind of complex, so if you want to wrap your head around it, then just ask.
It's really just it's another thing to check. It's just something to check, and because there's a lot of confusion around it. I think for the ordinary punter on the street and even people running businesses, that little triangular sign with the arrows around it, people think, well, that is recyclable, and then it's like, well, actually, no, not necessarily. And that system wasn't, even as I understand it, originally developed for recycling. It was developed to kind of identify the material, but not necessarily for recycling purposes. So and some of them are conglomerates of several different types of materials, so it's kind of having a look at that. But as we can clearly say, those are the ones to keep on, and the rigid plastics tend to be better. And as also in our design thing, what I found was interesting is, again, it's that color thing, isn't it? It's that also the way you use the material can make a massive difference as to whether it's compostable or not if you use a natural as opposed to a color.
Yeah, so like a clear PET is the highest value recycler post-consumer, whereas coloured PET has little to no value, and recyclers actually have to pay people to take it away. And that's just by changing the colour of your product. So it can have massive impact.
So that's just another thing to think about at design level A, because you can do perfectly great marketing and wonderful things with the right materials, but there's a sort of knee-jerk reaction to just use the same old, and it is a situation that changes as well. I mean, you touched on it there, that one of the other things that people may not be completely aware of is recycling isn't like a public system, like a good. It isn't just taken away, done nice. It's a market. It's getting the resources back out to then sell to somebody. If nobody's buying, then they don't want the material anymore, and that can change the game sometimes quite rapidly.
Absolutely, and I always think about that as a somebody who does recycling, as a consumer. What am I putting in my bin, and is it of quality? I mean, we listened to somebody talking about a waste audit, and they said they found a deer carcass in their recycling bin. And it's like, you can't recycle that.
Or the compostable, I'd say, probably.
Yeah, so it's definitely about trying to provide the highest quality at the end of its life so that it can continue to be used in high quality. Think about all the layers of like labels and little tear-offs and all of those kind of things, and how are they actually providing value to the recycler.
Yeah, and your inks and everything that goes with it. And it's at that design phase, and for longevity, if you don't want to be switching your materials around too often, you want to use those ones that are pretty solid, always have a solid market there for them, and always going to be collected. And thinking about the end user as well, and thinking, well, where's this going? It might go all over the country, it might be in a rural area, it might be all over. How's it going to get back in the system from there? One of the things we touched on as well is, of course, your local council is your best bet to find out exactly what's being recycled, but you do have to be quite have to ask the right questions, and be a little bit pushy to get the detail right, because even there they might not know everything, even though they're trying their absolute best, because there's an interface there between them and then the commercial recycler and all sorts of things down the track.
And the collector, so there might be a different organisation that's picking it up that actually doesn't recycle it. So yeah, there's a lot of communication barriers there. But one good thing that the government is working on, last year they put out some recommendations for the standardisation of curbside recycling. And what that means is that we would have a more national system for curbside. So what's recyclable in Auckland will be the same as what's recyclable in Hawke's Bay and Christchurch.
Yeah,
and
right.
That will help us as as businesses to actually get some really clear communication out there to our customers. So it'll be standardized across the country essentially.
That's fantastic, because part of the reason we're looking at it from a system point of view is because it is complex, but what we're trying to do is simplify down that system, particularly for businesses and for end users, so that they know what's what.
Yeah, and that standardization report, which again is linked in our resource, it points out some of those key design features like color and like lids and foils and all of those kind of things that are good to avoid and won't be collected in curbside recycling. So you can check it out there.
Perfect. And again, to stress the point, you don't need to change everything overnight. You could just pick one aspect and then just tweak it, see how the result goes, and then step by step we'll make those changes that are needed.
Absolutely.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to go on to the doozy of them all, I think, probably, which is your compostables. Hold fire on compostable packaging, we're saying. Kate, I'll leave you to start this one.
Thanks. Yeah, so no, the reason that we've got hold fire on compostable packaging is because there's a number of challenges right now that New Zealand is facing with regards to compostable packaging. Some of these challenges are things like there's no agreed compostability standard, there's no agreed labelling standards, we've got limited collection networks available, there's a lot of variation in the compostable materials and products that are coming onto the market, and there's a lot of confusion as well with conventional materials, so you're getting compostable materials ending up in like recycling waste streams and that kind of thing. As well as some of our commercial composters require organic certification to sell their product. So as soon as you throw packaging in there, their end product is no longer organic. So until we kind of have a really clear understanding, or if you as a business have a really clear understanding of those challenges and how to overcome them for your business, then I would just say, hold off for a minute. There are a lot of great brands out there who are really dedicated to compostable packaging and are doing a good job with it as well, and really paving the way for New Zealand. But if you're just looking for a good news story then and not really willing to put in the time and effort, then I'd probably just say hold fire.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice. And it's to stress, we have got those pioneers out there that are really trying to pull the system together and trying this new thing, but it's not for everyone. And the thing, and again, it's that keeping in mind, it's a market. It's not just a do-gooding. I stuck it in the compost heap, it disappears. They sell that compost. If they can't sell the compost, then they don't have a business anymore. And unfortunately, some of the biodegradable plastic, the kind of compostable plastics, don't offer extra nutrition. So some take it, some don't, and that can change quite quickly as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good thing to bring up, is that compostable packaging doesn't actually add any nutrients to the soil, but it can help to bring food waste to the soil. So and the food waste is where that nutrients kind of lies. And so, yeah, we just have to be a little bit careful about what we're putting into compostable packaging, because, for example, would you put some like bleach or something into a compostable product? Probably not, because you don't want to have bleach in your soil.
Yeah, you'll kill all those lovely bugs. Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. So
yeah. It's also the customer appearance, especially, I mean, I've written some like fearsomely complex things about coffee cups over the years, and one of the things is a compostable coffee cup looks exactly like all the other coffee cups, unfortunately, or unless you've got an eye for it and you really look at all the labeling. So what it's thinking through that design thing. What's the customer behavior? What are they likely to do? And if they're likely to just throw it in a compost bin, then in a landfill bin because they don't know what they're doing, or they'll put it in a recycling bin, what happens then? And just being a bit responsible about that. as we say, there are people that have set up systems to make sure it's going in the right places, and they've got, there's about, I think it ranges between 6 and 9 facilities around the country that can do the commercial composting on some of these materials, and some people are plugged into them and doing good work. But there's a sort of a little bit of a warning there about the latest snazzy thing, isn't there? I mean, we get a lot of emails going, we've just made this amazing thing out of leaves or whatever,
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things I can point out. As I said, we don't have agreed compostability standards out there yet, or certifications out there, but there are certifications that you can get. However, they're costly. They cost a big buck. Like, to get one packaging format certified home compostable can cost upwards of 30K. So it's not a small investment to make when we don't actually know that standard's going to be the one for New Zealand or the like. So yeah, there's a big investment. But one thing that I would also like to point out is that there's a working group on this. So the Packaging Forum have led up a compostable packaging technical working group, and it's led by Kim Renshaw, and we link kind of her details in the resource. But she's been doing a lot of surveys of kind of the industry. So if you are using compostables and you do think that it's the right solution, and you've got an idea that will help to kind of overcome some of these challenges, then I recommend getting in touch and engaging with that working group and checking out their survey that they've got live.
Absolutely, yeah. One of the things about this is get stuck in, because it's going to take all of us to innovate solutions around them. And if you're keen, definitely do that. I mean, we've seen examples of soft packaging that's compostable, but it's got 4 different layers on it, and again, it's just the labeling on the outside that isn't certified, but you have to get all the materials certified individually. But it is getting simpler, because we're seeing suppliers coming through that are pre-certifying things as well, and being much more rigorous and detailed about exactly what they're doing and how it works in the system as a whole. But do we think, I mean, I don't want to push you, but when do we think compostable is going to kind of clarify itself? Are we saying 1 year, 2 years, 5 years before we kind of feel like we can really start motoring on it?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask. I think that Kim or her group are probably the better ones to approach with that. I do think that they're going to play a part in, as I said, they are a really effective way of transporting food waste to soil. So if you've got something that's particularly tricky to package because it leaves a lot in the packaging behind, then potentially compostables is a way for you. But we've also got a decision tree in our 2019 resource that you can run through, which is asking the question, should I use compostable packaging, and kind of ask subsequent questions to that can help you make that decision.
Yeah, and we've got the link to our resources at the end, and you can find them all at sustainable.org.nz anyway, but we will link at the end. And yeah, one thing to stress is we have done a lot of the work for you. We've spent a bit of time on this over the last 18 months. And one of the things has been, okay, how do we make sensible decisions around composting at this stage? And we bounce off other people's work as well. All of this has been collaborative. We didn't conjure any of this out of thin air.
It's not just me. It's not just Andy.
Thank God.
Over 150 organisations have contributed to this work so far. So
yeah, and I think with that decision tree particularly, apologies, I can't remember the exact organisation, but there was a group that had got a real long way into that process before we did anything with it. But we've got a version.
They did some great work.
There you go. Yeah, and that was fantastic. And of course, Wastemins are at the other end of the food chain, so they know all about it. So yeah, but definitely grapple with that, and that's another decision tree that will change. But again, if you're really keen on compostables, definitely worth bringing that up and going through that and having a think. Okay. And I think this is last but not least.
Look out for regulations.
Look out for regulations. And this is interesting, isn't it? Because in a lot of instances, we say this about environmental things. It's like, whoa, it's kind of the stick element rather than the carrot of, things are going to change. But what we've seen while we've been working on this is things really are changing, aren't they?
Absolutely, at rapid pace. So as I mentioned earlier, in 2019, the Office for the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor, their core topic was plastics. And the outcome from that was that they produced this big report that made a whole bunch of recommendations to government, and government are acting on those recommendations. They have published their response to the Rethinking Plastics recommendations and uptaken pretty much all of them, which is awesome. Some other action that government have been up to, they've proposed a phase out of all PVC, so number 3, plastic food and beverage packaging. They've propose a phase out of all polystyrene food and beverage packaging, all other polystyrene packaging, all oxo-degradable plastic products. And so they proposed that last year, and the consultation for that closed in December 2020. And so the outcomes from that are likely to come out kind of in the next few months, I'd say. But also, there's this thing called regulated product stewardship. And so for anyone that doesn't know what product stewardship is, it's about taking responsibility for the products and the things that you sell at end of life, or helping with their life extension via take-back schemes. And the government have kind of indicated 6 priority areas for mandatory product stewardship or regulated product stewardship. So it's going to be, you have to have a product stewardship scheme in place, and plastic packaging is one of those 6 areas. Exactly how that looks hasn't really been worked out yet, and it's currently kind of going through a co-design process alongside a wider national plastics action plan. There's also been big changes in terms of import and export requirements to meet Basel Convention, which is an international agreement around the transport of hazardous waste, and that those requirements essentially make it hard to export mixed plastic waste. And so if you think again about that, like, where is this item going? If you're producing something that isn't in one of those high value plastics, it likely ends up in a mixed plastic bundle, and that mixed plastic bundle is no longer allowed to leave New Zealand shores. And so it becomes landfill here in New Zealand. So that was a big change that happened. And then there's a multitude of other things. I could talk for days about all the work that's going on. We've got investment into recycling infrastructure. There's a waste levy expansion, which is a huge one. In Europe, the charge to send a tonne of waste to landfill is €250. In New Zealand, up until this year, was $10 per tonne. And so you can just see the difference there that would make to stimulating, infrastructure for waste collection. So that levy is increasing to $60 by 2024. So it's going to become more expensive to landfill things, and that money that is being from things that are landfill will be redistributed into waste initiatives that will help to minimise waste to landfill in New Zealand, which is awesome. Then, they've got a container return scheme, which has been proposed and is getting reviewed at the moment. And again, they're working on the National Plastics Action Plan. So lots and lots coming out from government, which is great. And the team there are working so hard. And I've been huge supporters of the work that SBN's doing as well, and joining in on our masterclasses. And
yeah, it's been fabulous to see them there and have a little working group about, how we get the pathway to real change and what their role can be in it. And it seems like, it's, we're not talking about Never Land here. It's the next 3 to 5 years, this stuff is going to happen, so if you're investing in machinery, or you're starting up a new business, a startup, you really need to factor this stuff in, or you could find yourself in the odd dead end.
Absolutely, New Zealand signed up to the commitment via Ministry for the Environment. They've said that packaging will be 100% reusable, recyclable, compostable by 2025, and that means that everyone has to have packaging that is reusable, recyclable.
And that's for real. That's not the old style of recycling. That's the proper stuff where actually, the materials get back in the system. And we should say as well, regulation is often, often people take a dim view of regulation, but a lot of this process was kickstarted by regulation. In China, saying, well, we're just not going to, burn stuff in our streets and bury it under the ground for you anymore, and that's a good thing, And there's a lot of stuff we shouldn't really accept, and it definitely helps us and kickstarts innovation, and also creates these new spaces for people to go into and do new and fascinating and awesome businesses. And some of these, and it goes back to that auditing process again, it's like some of these real nasties, the ones that we kind of all know are problematic, the single uses, your sort of toxic stuff is on its way out, and that's a fantastic thing. We should say the oxy-degradables, they're the ones that the plastics where they just broke down. If you put them in the air for long enough, they broke down into little plastics, which really doesn't help much. They're just don't touch them with a barge pole.
I actually had a discussion this morning with Rachel Parker from Plastics New Zealand. We were talking about the new realm of moving away from this oxo-degradable, photodegradable to landfill biodegradable plastics. And that's a really confusing area right now that we're trying to combat. So I'd say if you're looking into that, hold fire while we work out what the pros and benefits are of that product and material.
Yeah. There's a lot to learn there for the enthusiastic about what actually happens in a landfill, which is a lot more complex than you think. It's not just a hole in the ground anymore, by any means. So there's another area there.
Some of them are still very old school.
Well, true.
They are a hole in the ground, and they don't have the technology to capture the energy or anything like that, so they don't actually want things breaking down, and that's a lot of New Zealand's landfills. So.
Yeah, that's right. You know, I've seen these sort of rubbish plastic bags where it's like this bag breaks down, and I'm like, well, is that good? Do we want that breaking down in a landfill? And it's terrifying, isn't it, that we haven't really moved on from this sort of Neanderthal approach of we just bury our stuff or set fire to it, you know, and that's kind of us, you know, and all these amazingly complex things. I think we can do better.
Yeah, that's definitely what I would say. Like, would wrap up a nice summary to this conversation is that let's just do better. Let's be so innovative that we actually, you know, waste isn't even a concept anymore. Let's not create waste in the first place. Let's make sure that the materials that we use are of high value throughout their entire life cycle, and that life cycle doesn't actually end. And let's look at these new innovative solutions. Let's get technology involved. I mean, there's so much potential for the future right now, and it's a really exciting space to play in. So lead the way, and
there's a particular geographical kind of aspect to this, I think, anyway, and in terms of, you know, we're running a sort of European or major landmass US style waste system on a small island in the middle of the Pacific, and we kind of got away with that by putting things on ships and sending them somewhere else, and that game's over. And so now, you know, as a group, we've got to design a whole waste system that and a design system for packaging and our products that works inside our boundaries and also keeps that value here for us, you know, and works well for New Zealand rather than pretending that we're France or somewhere.
Absolutely.
And there's some of the challenges as well, you know, we're seeing, and because we've got a dispersed population in some rural areas and stuff. I know you're working on Reverse as well, which is kind of the project to bring how we make product stewardship work, how we can make the logistics work for businesses to bring stuff back to them, because that's tricky, because someone's, you know, if you're in the back of nowhere.
You know, if you're putting these systems in place, think about how it's actually accessible for your consumer as well. And right now, that is a big challenge with reusables, is that we don't have, you know, national infrastructure like we do for recycling. I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, wouldn't it be incredible that if everything I bought from the supermarket was in beautifully designed long life packaging, that instead of putting out in my recycling bin, I put into a reuse bin, and it all goes and gets washed in centralized washing infrastructure. That's my dream. And so if anyone can help me make that a reality, then get in touch.
Yeah. Sometimes we feel we're in a nightmare, but there's an awful lot of dreams available when we start thinking together, and we can make them real. Fantastic. So that's our 6 points. We hope they cover a lot of ground. Obviously, the report covers a lot more ground, and you can kind of create your own points as you go. We'll spend a little bit of time on questions. We've got a couple of questions, and we've got a little bit of time left. So we'll go through that, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, maybe really quickly, I'll just outline what's in the report to give people a really good understanding. So
do that.
In the first section, there's a big section on the kind of keynotes that came from the speakers of the Masterclass 2020, and then the next stage is the next section is an update on our pathway to 2025. In our 2019 series, we kind of pathed out what we think, you know, the key milestones that we need to meet 2025 commitments are, and we've done a bit of a snapshot in this report about where we are at in 2020 or the end of 2020. And then there's a section on packaging design for recycling, and that kind of shows you, as I said again, that kind of complexities around 1, 2s and 5s and which ones you should choose and why you should choose them. And there's a section on the government updates that I spoke briefly about today. Then we've got a summary of the discussions that we actually had in the masterclasses. So there's a summary of where we're at with reusable packaging, what's happening with data, so why we need data for good decision making and whose role it is to collect that data. There's a section there on flexible packaging, so what are we doing about all of these films, and it goes into the soft plastics recycling scheme, so if you're interested in that, there's links there. A section on compostable packaging and a bit of a snapshot of where we are, as well as a bunch of case studies of brands that are doing really cool things in the packaging world, and resources as well, links to lots and lots of goodies that you can refer back to when making your own decisions.
Yeah, because like if you were there was a hell of a lot going on. So it's really worth sitting down and reading the report and pulling the bits out you need. And if you weren't there, it's a chance to be there for free, which is not to be sniffed at, because there was an awful lot of value in the room, and there was people bringing their A game, and really, and a lot of it was very trusting environment, and people were saying things and telling people detail that they may not have shared elsewhere. So it's really worth getting to grips with it.
Yeah, and thank you to Mark's Design, who helped us make it as beautiful and readable as it actually is. So
yeah, fantastic. They helped us all the way through with some fantastic posters and things as well that we worked on. There was so much mucking in. There was so many people coming and helping out. It was fantastic, and long may it continue. And we'll talk a little bit at the end as well about what our next steps are with that, because we're going bigger, better, faster on that in the next sort of few months as well. We'll just take on a couple of these questions before we disappear. One of them was around, which I think is a great question, which is on Facebook, which is about essentially about the soft plastics thing. We're seeing soft plastics being reprocessed into fence posts and into asphalt and stuff. There's what do we think about that? I suppose one of the things we should say first is that we're not setting ourselves up as the judge, jury and executioner on anybody's ideas. That's not our role. We don't have that expertise. We're looking at collaborating across the board, and soft plastics is a really tough one, but what can we say, Kate? I suppose it's the circular economy piece, eh?
We have a section on flexible packaging in our resource, and the challenges that surround it. I mean, flexible packaging, or our soft plastics, they do provide really valuable functional properties, like the fact that they use a very small amount of plastic versus rigid plastics. They are lightweight, so in terms of transporting things, it brings down your emissions. So there are good qualities to the soft plastics. The scheme that's in place right now is an awesome temporary solution, I think, that, on the way to a circular economy and on the way to getting where we really want to be with packaging. This is a better than it ending up in landfill. So it's actually being used for a functional purpose. Those fence posts last a really long time. So yeah, I'm very supportive of this scheme as a placeholder for what's next. But yeah, I think that you've got.
If you're critical of it, bring your better idea. We'd love to hear it. That's fantastic.
And we'll share it.
Yeah, that's right. And we should say it's overarching this sort of the circular economy idea, which is that there is no such thing as waste. All these materials should come back into circulation and not be sort of stranded anywhere. So there's more work to do on all that. One of the things, the other one, we're touching on this afternoon. We've got a live event this afternoon here at Unitec with construction and demolition folks. A lot of you may well come along. There's a lot of plastic wrapping and other waste used in the building industry. Is that something? Have we seen options for reuse there? Is there movement?
Honestly, I haven't dived down into it, and I'll be really interested to see what the discussion comes out of this afternoon. Construction and demolition, we've definitely been more kind of consumer facing packaging, but because there's innovation happening in that space and there's solutions being created, and in terms of things like pallet wrap and the likes, then I'm sure there's options coming through from the C&D. I know that there's a I'll have to look it up. It was mentioned in the last webinar that we did on packaging, and there's a more lightweight version of pallet wrap that's out, and it can save up to 80% plastic that's traditionally used in traditional pallet wraps. And so I know for construction and demolition, they've got different shapes, and the traditional kind of reusable might not be an option, but this alternative that uses significantly less plastic and is stronger might be a great interim.
Yeah, I'm going to be fascinated by the conversation this afternoon, and it is essentially an extension of this work. We're applying the same principles and trying to get that sector fired up as much. And we've had representatives from it involved in this process already. And I mean, from my point of view, the building sites I see now out of my window are a heck of a lot cleaner than the ones I used to work on when I was a kid. We used to have in the sort of 80s and 90s with these piles of rubbish just built up and disappearing. It's meticulous now. It's all kind of organized, and it's just really taking that time, which is going to be interesting and something else we can move on with. Let's just touch on where we're going to go next, because that's exciting. We're going bigger. What's the plans rolling out from this? And I know that people can get more access than previously, because it was a little bit of a closed shop, because we wanted to keep it manageable.
Yeah, absolutely. So in previous years, we really had very intense workshopping elements, which meant that we had to kind of limit the amount of people in the room and really be very selective about getting a representative cohort of representative New Zealand businesses. Whereas this time, because there's been so much learning and so much kind of progression on, some of the challenges that we're having with working groups breaking out around things like compostables and reusables, there's a lot more updates to be had rather than questions to be answered. And so we're going bigger. We're opening it up. We're having, I think, 300 person capacity, and we're also changing the topic slightly. So in the past, we've focused very heavily on plastic packaging. But what we're realizing more and more is that we have now a relatively good understanding about what is recyclable, what's not recyclable, and where our challenge areas lie for plastics. But we don't have the same level of knowledge as a system around things like fiber, which is like your paper and your cardboards. We don't have the same for glass or aluminium. We don't know how all of these different material types actually stack up next to one another. And so this year, we're really going to be diving into those different material types and starting to look across the board about what is sustainable packaging and what material might trump another for different applications.
Yeah, all this sort of flowed out naturally from the process, because these are the materials sometimes people want to switch to, and obviously they're asking the question, well, is it better or not? And it's another world of complexity for us all to get around and work out together. And also it's
huge complications with fiber at the moment, where we've been talking to recyclers and they're saying all of these companies are moving into, paper and cardboard, but what they don't realize is that there's a plastic liner in them, and so they're not recyclable at all, and they're not compostable at all. And putting our recyclers in another tricky situation where they've got a new material stream just because it's deemed to be, more plant-based material that in fact might not actually fit into our infrastructure.
Yeah, so I mean, we're going capacities. There's no excuses now for not coming along and getting involved. It's also been fascinating to see the spin-offs that have happened, with people just connecting in those workshops, coming up with solutions themselves, going, hey, if I connect with you, I can do a recyclable version of what I'm doing. And partly we've gone larger simply because there's so much energy there now, and there's so much action happening, which is fantastic to see.
Yeah, so we're going to have updates from kind of those groups that I was talking about, the working groups that are kind of moving through some of the challenges in the system, but also from the recycling infrastructure, the industry experts in terms of packaging, the plastic body groups, and updates from government as well. And we really want there to be an interactive networking element to the day as well. So if you're having a struggle around one specific topic, then you'll have the opportunity to talk to experts in that kind of area and generate discussion around your specific challenges as well. So yeah, it's going to be a great day. Always lots and lots of information packed into them, and very quick pace. But yeah, I'm excited.
Fantastic. Yeah, because we've got a question that's talking about, what gaps are left. And it's like, well, the answer is quite a lot. One of the diagnostic report really picked up there's a kind of long way to go, but we are filling them in. And it's one of those things that will accelerate. We think that as we sort of fill in the bigger picture, some of these bigger pieces will start to work together in greater harmony. That's the vision. Well, brilliant. I think that's us out of time for this lunchtime. We'll send people back out to their lives. Just wanted to say thanks very much to our partners again, Foodstuffs, New Zealand King Salmon, and ThinkStep, who helped to make all of this happen, as well as everybody that came along to the masterclass workshops, because you know who you are. If you look for those materials, you'll see your ideas there and see the work that you put in, and it's just fabulous. That's what we want to do. That's what we want to see. We're just there to kind of glue it together. We'll leave you with the holding slide, which will have the link on for downloading that report. It's at sustainable.org.nz. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Cool. Thank you.